They're watching me right now. I can feel their eyes on the back of my neck. The worst part is I don't think they're human anymore, if they ever were. 3 months on night shift at Lakeside Memorial Hospital changed everything I thought I knew about reality, about what waits for us in the dark. Welcome to the creepy shadow. If you love true scary stories that send shivers down your spine, you're in the right place. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the things I saw while working the night shift, things I've never shared with anyone before, things I've been trying to forget. I should warn you now, you might not want to listen to this alone. Because once you know what I know, you'll never look at empty hallways the same way again. You'll never trust the shadows in the corner of your eye. And you'll never, ever ignore that feeling of being watched. Part 1. The Patient in Room 408. My name is Alex. 3 years ago, I took a job as an overnight security guard at Lakeside Memorial Hospital. The pay was good, much better than my previous retail job, and the hours suited me. I've always been a night owl, more comfortable in darkness than daylight. The interview process was surprisingly straightforward. They were desperate to fill the position after the previous guard quit without notice. Night shifts can be lonely, my supervisor Tom warned during orientation. Just do your rounds, check the security cameras, and call if there's an emergency. Most nights nothing happens. Tom was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with deep creases around his eyes that seemed to hold secrets. As he handed me my badge and uniform, he hesitated. "One more thing," he said, his voice dropping. "Stay away from the east wing on the 4th floor between 2 and 4 a.m. That area is under renovation, and the contractors don't want anyone disturbing their equipment." I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. Hospitals always have areas under construction, and at night, it made sense to avoid making noise near patient rooms. My first 2 weeks were uneventful. I'd make my rounds through the quiet corridors, checking doors were locked, nodding at the occasional nurse hurrying between stations. The hospital took on a different personality at night. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made your skin crawl, and the squeak of my shoes on the polished floors echoed too loudly in the stillness. But I got used to it. It was during my 3rd week that I first noticed something odd about room 408. I was making my 1 a.m. round on the 4th floor when I passed by it. Unlike the other rooms in that hallway, the door to 408 was closed, with a small handwritten note taped to it, "Do not disturb, special case." I checked my security tablet, which contained information about occupied rooms and any specific protocols. Room 408 wasn't listed as occupied. Thinking it might be an oversight, I radioed down to the night nurse on duty. "Hey, Sarah, is room 408 supposed to be occupied? It's not showing up on my system." There was a long pause before Sarah responded, her voice tight. 408? That room is closed for maintenance. Why do you ask? There's a note on the door saying, "Special case." Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. Another long pause. "I'll check the system. Stay where you are." 5 minutes later, Sarah appeared at the end of the hallway, walking briskly toward me. She was a veteran nurse in her 40s who'd worked at Lakeside for over 20 years. Nothing seemed to rattle her, until now. Her face was pale as she approached. "There shouldn't be any note on this door," she said, staring at the paper. "This wing is scheduled for renovation. No patients have been assigned to this room for months." Together we stood looking at the note. The handwriting was strange, jagged and pressed so deeply into the paper that it had torn in places. "Should we check inside?" I asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Hospital protocol. If there's any indication a room might be occupied when it shouldn't be, we have to verify." She pulled out her master key card and swiped it through the reader. The lock clicked and she pushed the door open. The room was dark and cold, much colder than the hallway. Sarah reached for the light switch and flipped it on. The room was empty. No patient, no equipment, nothing out of the ordinary except for the unusual chill. The bed was perfectly made, the surfaces dust-free, as if the room had been recently cleaned and prepared for someone. "That's strange," Sarah murmured, stepping inside. "Maintenance was supposed to have cleared this entire wing." I followed her in, noticing how my breath clouded in front of my face. "Why is it so cold in here?" Sarah checked the thermostat on the wall. "It's set to normal. Must be a problem with the HVAC system." As we turned to leave, I noticed something on the window, condensation forming strange patterns on the glass. Looking closer, it almost appeared like handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms against the window from the inside. But we were on the 4th floor with nothing but a sheer drop below. "Did you see that?" I asked Sarah, pointing to the window. She glanced where I was pointing and frowned. "See what?" "The condensation." It's just from the temperature difference. Before I could explain what I thought I'd seen, the lights flickered once, twice, and then stabilized. We should go, Sarah said sharply. I'll report the temperature issue to maintenance in the morning. And I'll look into who might have put that note on the door. As we stepped back into the hallway, I glanced back into the room one last time. For a split second, so brief I almost convinced myself I imagined it, I thought I saw a figure sitting on the edge of the bed. A thin, hunched silhouette that hadn't been there seconds before. I blinked and it was gone. Sarah locked the door, removed the note, and we went our separate ways. I continued my rounds, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Later that night, around 3:15 a.m., I was in the security office checking the camera feeds when I noticed something odd on the monitor showing the fourth-floor hallway. A dark figure was standing outside room 408. The image was grainy and I couldn't make out any details, but it appeared to be a person in a hospital gown, standing perfectly still, facing the door. I radioed Sarah immediately. Do we have a patient wandering on the fourth floor? Near room 408. That's impossible, she replied. The nearest patients are in the West Wing and they're all accounted for. Are you sure about what you're seeing? Checking now, I said, already heading for the elevator. By the time I reached the fourth floor, the hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. But the note was back on the door of room 408, the same note we had removed hours earlier with the same jagged handwriting. I took a photo of it with my phone before removing it again. When I returned to the security office, I reviewed the camera footage from the hallway. The figure had appeared at exactly 3:08 a.m., stood motionless for 4 minutes, then seemed to dissolve into the shadows. One frame it was there, the next it was gone. The rest of that night passed without incident, but when I mentioned the strange occurrences to Tom the next morning, his reaction took me by surprise. You went into room 408? He asked, his face draining of color. Yeah, with Sarah. The room was supposed to be empty, but... Listen to me carefully, Tom interrupted, his voice low. That room is off limits. I thought I made that clear during your orientation. The East Wing is restricted between 2 and 4 a.m. You mentioned construction workers not wanting their equipment disturbed, I said. But there was no equipment in that room. It was completely empty. Tom looked away, rubbing his forehead. Just stay away from there during those hours. Hospital policy. I wanted to press him further, but his closed-off body language made it clear the conversation was over. That day I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that momentary silhouette on the bed, the handprints on the window, the figure in the hallway. I spent hours researching Lakeside Memorial Hospital's history, looking for any incidents that might explain the strange atmosphere around room 408. What I found disturbed me more than I expected. 6 months earlier, a patient named Eleanor Reese had died in room 408 under unusual circumstances. She had been admitted for routine observation following minor surgery but was found deceased at 3:08 a.m., the exact time I'd seen the figure on the camera. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but according to a local news article, her family had disputed this finding, claiming Eleanor had no history of heart problems. More disturbing were the comments from a night nurse who had since left the hospital. She reported that in the weeks before Eleanor's death, the patient had complained about someone watching her sleep and cold spots in her room. The nurse's concerns had apparently been dismissed as the patient suffering from paranoia due to medication. I returned to work that night with a growing sense of dread. I told myself I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild based on coincidence and an old news story. Hospitals were full of strange noises and temperature fluctuations. Security cameras glitched. There were logical explanations. But at 1 a.m. when I passed by room 408, the note was back on the door. This time below, "Do not disturb special case" were additional words. She knows you saw her. I stood frozen in the hallway staring at those words. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached out with a trembling hand to take the note. The paper felt ice cold to the touch, as if it had been stored in a freezer. I should have called Sarah. I should have radioed Tom. Instead, driven by a compulsion I couldn't explain, I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. The room beyond was pitch black, and as I pushed the door open wider, I was hit by a wave of cold air so intense it stung my face. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on with numb fingers. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the same empty room as before, but now the bed sheets were disturbed as if someone had been lying there recently. The chair next to the bed was angled toward the door, positioned perfectly to watch anyone who entered. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and fragile in the heavy silence. "Is anyone in here?" No response, but as my flashlight swept across the room, it caught something on the bathroom door, more condensation forming what looked like writing. I stepped closer, my flashlight illuminating the message that had formed in the moisture. You shouldn't be here at 3:08. I backed out of the room, heart racing, and pulled the door shut behind me. I radioed Sarah immediately, my voice shaking as I reported what I'd found. I'm coming up, she said, sounding concerned. Don't go back in there alone. While waiting for Sarah, I checked my watch. 1:17 a.m. Almost 2 hours until 3:08. Part of me wanted to flee the hospital and never return, but a stronger part needed answers. Sarah arrived 5 minutes later looking worried. When I showed her the note and told her about the message on the bathroom door, she insisted on checking the room again. But when we entered, everything had changed. The bed was perfectly made. The chair was in its original position against the wall. And there was no writing on the bathroom door, no condensation at all. Alex, Sarah said gently, maybe you should take a break. The night shift can play tricks on your mind sometimes. I've experienced it myself. I showed her the photo I'd taken of the note, but even that failed to convince her completely. She suggested that perhaps someone on the day shift was playing an elaborate prank on the new night guard. It happens, she said, not meeting my eyes. People get bored, try to scare the newcomers with hospital ghost stories. I'll ask around, see if anyone's been accessing this room. But I could tell from her expression that she didn't believe her own explanation. There was something she wasn't telling me. After Sarah left, I continued my rounds, deliberately staying away from the 4th floor east wing. At 2:45 a.m. I was in the security office, watching the camera feeds with intense focus. The hallway outside room 408 remained empty as the minutes ticked by. 2:50 a.m. Nothing. 2:55 a.m. Still clear. 3 a.m. The camera feed began to flicker slightly, developing a static interference that made the image jump. 3:05 a.m. The static worsened, the hallway barely visible through the electronic snow on the screen. And then, at exactly 3:08 a.m., the feed cleared momentarily, just long enough for me to see not one but 3 figures standing in the hallway. One outside room 408, and 2 others at opposite ends of the corridor as if standing guard. Unlike the vague silhouette I'd seen the night before, these figures were more distinct, gaunt patients in hospital gowns, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Then the feed cut out completely, leaving the monitor black. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Alex. It was Sarah, her voice tight with fear. Are you seeing this? The temperature on the entire 4th floor just dropped 20 degrees. The patients are complaining. I was already grabbing my flashlight against my better judgment. I lost visual on the 4th floor. I'm heading up to check. Wait, Sarah said urgently. Don't go up there. I'm calling Tom. But I was already in the elevator watching the numbers climb. 1, 2, 3. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, I was hit by air so cold it took my breath away. The hallway was dimly lit, several of the overhead lights flickering erratically. I stepped out cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the semi-darkness. The silence was absolute. Not the normal quiet of a hospital at night, with distant beeping monitors and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes. This was a dead silence that seemed to swallow all sound, even the noise of my own footsteps. I moved slowly down the corridor toward the east wing, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. As I rounded the corner, I saw room 408 ahead, its door now standing wide open. Light spilled from inside, not the harsh fluorescent glare of hospital lighting, but a softer, yellower glow, like old-fashioned incandescent bulbs. I approached cautiously, radio in one hand, flashlight in the other. From the doorway I could see the room had transformed. The modern hospital furnishings were gone, replaced by older, heavier wooden furniture. The monitoring equipment had disappeared. The room looked as it might have decades ago when the hospital was first built. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was a woman in an old-fashioned hospital gown. Her back was to me, her dark hair hanging in a tangled mass down her spine. She was unnaturally thin, her vertebrae protruding like a row of knobs under her gown. My radio hissed with static, and the woman's head snapped up at the sound. Hello? I called out, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Ma'am? You shouldn't be in here. Slowly, with jerky, unnatural movements, she began to turn toward me. My radio crackled again, and this time Tom's voice came through, distorted but recognizable. Alex, get out of the east wing now. Whatever you do, don't look. His warning came too late. The woman had fully turned to face me, and what I saw wasn't a face at all, but a void, a dark, swirling emptiness where features should have been, pulling at the light around it like a black hole. The only distinguishable features were two pinpricks of light where eyes should be, fixing me with a stare that froze me in place. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The flashlight slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor, rolling until its beam illuminated the corner of the room, where shadows were gathering, thickening, taking shape. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, breaking the paralysis. I was yanked backward with such force I stumbled and nearly fell. It was Tom, his face ashen. "Don't look at her," he hissed, dragging me away from the doorway. "Keep your eyes down and move." Together we hurried down the hallway, the lights flickering more violently around us. I could hear something behind us, a dry, shuffling sound like papers being dragged across the floor. "What is that?" I gasped as Tom pulled me around the corner toward the elevator. "What was in that room?" "Not now," Tom growled, repeatedly jabbing the elevator button. "We need to get downstairs." The shuffling sound grew louder, closer. The temperature dropped even further, frost crystallizing on the walls around us. Tom muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Finally, the elevator arrived. We tumbled inside and Tom hit the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, I made the mistake of looking up. The thing that had been in room 408 was at the end of the hallway, still with that void-like face, but now I could see more of its form. Its limbs were two long joints bending in impossible directions as it moved. And it wasn't alone. Behind it were shadowy figures, similar in their wrongness but less distinct, as if they were still forming. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the sight, but the image was burned into my mind. Tom leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said finally. "No one is." "What was it?" I demanded. "What's happening on the 4th floor?" Tom closed his eyes briefly. "I don't know exactly what they are. But they've been here as long as the hospital has. Most of the time they stay contained, hidden. But between 2 and 4 a.m., especially around 3:08, the barrier thins. They can manifest more fully. There's more than one." "There's always been more than one," Tom said grimly. "The woman you saw, we call her the patient. She was the first. The others, they're people who saw her. Who got too close during the active hours." My blood ran cold. "Are you saying she takes people?" Tom's face was grim. "Not exactly. It's more like, she changes them. Once you see her face, her real face, you're marked. That's why I tried to warn you." The elevator reached the lobby, and the doors opened to reveal Sarah waiting anxiously. "Did you see her?" she asked immediately, searching my face. When she saw my expression, she closed her eyes briefly. "Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry." Tom led us to the small break room off the main lobby, checking that we were alone before continuing. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low. "What I'm about to tell you isn't in any employee handbook. It's passed down from one night worker to another, but only on a need-to-know basis. And now you need to know." Part 2, The Night Janitor. Tom's revelation about the patient in room 408 shook me to my core, but it was only the beginning of what I would learn about Lakeside Memorial Hospital's dark secrets. The hospital was built in 1938, Tom explained as we sat in the break room, the night now quiet around us. The east wing of the 4th floor was originally the psychiatric ward. In those days, mental health treatment was different, experimental, less regulated. Sarah nodded grimly. They performed procedures that would be considered torture by today's standards. Patients who couldn't be cured were often just sedated and left to waste away. "Eleanor Reese," I said, remembering the article I'd found. "Was she one of those patients?" Tom and Sarah exchanged a look. "Eleanor Reese died 6 months ago," Tom said carefully. "But the entity in room 408 has been there much longer. We call her the patient, because that's what she once was, but her real name was Margaret Holloway. She was admitted in 1952 with what they called acute melancholia, after her entire family died in a house fire. The doctors tried everything to cure her grief," Sarah continued. "Electroshock therapy, ice baths, experimental drugs. When nothing worked, they turned to more extreme measures. Procedures that were off the books, never documented." Tom's face was grim. "The story goes that on March 8, 1953 at 3:08 a.m., Margaret finally broke. She attacked her doctor during a late-night session, but instead of subduing her, something went wrong. Both Margaret and the doctor disappeared." "Disappeared?" I echoed. "Vanished without a trace," Tom confirmed. "The room was found empty with the door locked from the inside. The only clue was a message written on the bathroom mirror, I am still here. The hospital covered it up, Sarah added. Claimed Margaret had been transferred to another facility. The doctor was said to have taken a sudden leave of absence. But night staff began reporting strange occurrences in room 408, cold spots, equipment malfunctioning, glimpses of a woman standing in the corner. I thought of the figure I'd seen on the bed, the handprints on the window. So this entity has been haunting that room for over 70 years? Why hasn't anyone done anything? You assume no one has tried, Tom said wearily. Priests, mediums, paranormal investigators, the hospital administration brought them all in quietly over the years. Nothing worked. Eventually they settled on containment. Keep patients away from room 408, especially during the active hours. But occasionally someone slips through the cracks. Like Eleanor Reese, I murmured. Exactly, Sarah nodded. A scheduling error put her in that room. By the time we realized it was too late. She'd already started seeing things, complaining about being watched. And then she died at exactly 3:08 a.m., I finished. But you said she had no history of heart problems. What really happened to her? Tom and Sarah exchanged another look before Tom answered. Her heart did stop, but not from natural causes. The autopsy revealed anomalies. Her internal organs showed signs of extreme freezing, as if she'd been submerged in liquid nitrogen. And her eyes. He trailed off, shuddering at the memory. Her eyes were burned out, Sarah whispered. Completely hollowed, like she'd stared directly at the sun. But the strangest thing was the expression frozen on her face. Pure terror. A heavy silence fell over the room. I tried to process everything they were telling me, struggling to reconcile it with my understanding of reality. Why didn't you warn me properly? I finally asked, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. A vague warning about construction doesn't exactly prepare someone for whatever that thing is. Would you have believed us? Tom countered. If during your orientation I'd said, by the way, there's a supernatural entity that haunts the 4th floor, don't look at it or it might consume your soul, would you have taken the job? Or would you have thought we were playing a cruel prank on the new guy? He had a point, but it didn't ease my growing anger and fear. So what happens now? I asked. You said I'm marked. What does that mean for me? Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It doesn't mean you're doomed, Alex. Tom was marked 20 years ago and he's still here. I looked at Tom in surprise. You saw her face? He nodded slowly. When I was a young security guard just like you. I got curious about the rumors. Went up there at 3 a.m. on a dare from another guard. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a strange, branching scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow, like frozen lightning captured under his skin. This appeared the next day. It grows a little each year, spreading up my arm. The doctors can't explain it. Is that what's going to happen to me? I asked, fighting the urge to check my own arms for similar marks. Everyone who sees her is affected differently, Sarah explained. Some develop physical changes like Tom. Others experience nightmares, sleepwalking, or an inexplicable pull toward room 408 during the active hours. The important thing is not to go back there between 2 and 4 a.m. That's when she's strongest, when the barrier between whatever she is now and our world is thinnest. And the others? I pressed. You said there were others with her. Who are they? Tom and Sarah exchanged another look, and I was beginning to hate that silent communication, the way they clearly knew more than they were telling me. That's a story for another night, Tom said finally, checking his watch. It's almost 4 a.m. The active hours are ending. We should get back to work before anyone notices we're all missing from our posts. I wanted to protest, to demand they tell me everything now, but exhaustion was setting in, the adrenaline of my encounter with the patient draining away. Just one more question, I said as we stood to leave. Has anyone ever tried to destroy room 408? Tear down the walls, rebuild it completely? Tom laughed, a hollow sound with no humor. In 1978, the hospital decided to demolish the entire East Wing and rebuild it with modern facilities. The construction crew started with room 408. The foreman went in with a sledgehammer, took one swing at the wall, and disappeared. Just like Margaret and her doctor. They found his sledgehammer embedded in the plaster, but no sign of him. After that, they sealed the room and built around it. On that chilling note, we returned to our duties. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of cold eyes following my movements through the hospital corridors. When my shift ended at 7 a.m., I was more than ready to leave. The morning sunlight streaming through the hospital entrance felt like a blessing, warming my skin as I stepped outside. I promised myself I would hand in my resignation that afternoon. No job was worth the terror I'd experienced. But as I reached my car in the parking lot, I noticed something on my windshield, a small handwritten note held down by the wiper blade. With trembling fingers I plucked it free. The handwriting was jagged, pressed deeply into the paper. "She is not the one you should fear." I looked around frantically, searching for whoever might have left the message, but the parking lot was filled only with the normal morning shift arrivals, nurses and doctors trudging sleepily to the hospital entrance. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me that day. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the night, turning the note over and over in my hands. Who had left it? What did it mean? If the patient wasn't the one I should fear, then who, or what, was? By the time evening approached, I'd convinced myself that quitting wasn't an option. Not yet. I needed answers. And so, against my better judgment, I returned to Lakeside Memorial for another night shift. Tom seemed surprised to see me. "Thought you might call in sick," he said as I clocked in. "Most people do after their first encounter." "I considered never coming back at all," I admitted. "But then I found this on my car." I showed him the note. His expression darkened as he read it. "Where did you get this?" "It was on my windshield this morning." "Do you know what it means?" Tom handed the note back to me, his movements careful, deliberate. "I think it's time you heard about Martin Green." "Who's Martin Green?" "He was the night janitor here for almost 30 years, from the 1960s until 1992. And he knew more about the hospital's secrets than anyone." Tom checked his watch. "I need to start my rounds, but meet me in the basement archive room at midnight. I'll tell you everything then." The first half of my shift crawled by. I deliberately kept away from the fourth floor, focusing on the lower levels, the outpatient clinics, and the administrative wing. At 11:45 p.m., I made my way to the basement. The archive room was tucked away in a far corner, past the boiler room and laundry facilities. It was filled with metal shelving units packed with old paper records, files that had yet to be digitized or were kept as physical backups. The air was thick with the smell of dust and aging paper. Tom was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table with a cardboard box in front of him. He gestured for me to take the seat across from him. "Everything I'm about to tell you breaks about a dozen hospital confidentiality policies," he said without preamble. "But you need to know. Your life might depend on it." He opened the box and pulled out a worn leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to Martin Green. When he died, he left specific instructions for it to be passed to the current head of night security. It's been handed down from one security chief to another for the past 30 years. Tom pushed the journal toward me. "Martin didn't just clean the hospital. He watched it, documented everything that happened during the night hours. Read the entry for April 17, 1968. I carefully opened the journal to the indicated date. The handwriting was cramped but legible. April 17, 1968, 2:15 a.m. The temperature dropped on the fourth floor again. Found frost on the inside of room 408, despite the heating being on full. As I was cleaning the adjacent hallway, I heard whispering coming from inside. No patients are currently assigned to that room. 2:45 a.m. Returned to the fourth floor to finish mopping. Noticed a dark liquid seeping under the door of 408. When I touched it, it was ice cold but not water. More like oil, but it evaporated within seconds of contact with air, leaving no residue. 3:08 a.m. Was on the third floor when all lights flickered throughout the building. Went to check the electrical panel in the basement. On my way back up, I saw Dr. Harrison entering room 408. This struck me as odd, as Dr. Harrison doesn't work night shifts and isn't assigned to the psychiatric department. 3:30 a.m. Returned to the fourth floor. No sign of Dr. Harrison, and room 408's door was locked. When I pressed my ear against it, I could hear a woman crying, though the sound seemed to be coming from very far away. April 18, 1968, morning note. Dr. Harrison was reported missing this morning. His car is still in the parking lot, but there's no trace of him in the hospital. This is the third disappearance connected to room 408 since I started working here. I looked up at Tom, my mouth dry. He just documented everything? All these supernatural occurrences, people disappearing, and he kept working here. Martin believed he was protected, Tom explained, turning the journal to a different page. Look at this entry from 1975. November 3, 1975. I know now why she doesn't take me. The symbols work. After consulting with the woman from the local bookshop, I've extended the markings to cover the entire length of my mop handle. As long as the symbols remain intact, I can move freely during the active hours without fear of her noticing me. The challenge will be keeping them hidden from regular staff. Tom pulled another item from the box. A wooden mop handle, aged and worn, with strange symbols carved into its surface and filled with what looked like dried ink or paint. These are protection sigils, Tom said. Ancient symbols designed to ward off supernatural entities. Martin researched them extensively, consulting with occult experts and local practitioners of folk magic. He was convinced they kept him safe during his night shifts. And did they? I asked, skeptical despite everything I'd seen. Martin worked here for 30 years, frequently cleaning the fourth floor during the active hours. He never experienced so much as a cold spot or a whisper. When he died, it was from cancer in his own bed, surrounded by family. Tom ran his fingers over the carved symbols. I had these same markings tattooed on my shoulder after my encounter with the patient. Haven't had a direct experience with her since, though the scar keeps spreading. I thought about the strange encounter in room 408, the void-like face that had stared at me. But if these symbols work so well, why doesn't everyone who works nights have them? Why keep it a secret? Hospital administration doesn't acknowledge the irregular nature of room 408, Tom said carefully. Officially, they attribute the incidents to gas leaks, electrical faults, or the mental strain of night work. Martin kept his journals hidden, shared his knowledge only with trusted colleagues. If he'd gone public, he'd have been dismissed as delusional, and his protection methods would have been taken away. So why are you sharing this with me now? Tom tapped the note I'd received. She is not the one you should fear. Martin wrote about this too. The patient isn't the only entity in Lakeside Memorial, just the most notorious. There are others, shadows that move against the light, whispers in empty rooms, reflections that linger after you've walked away from mirrors. But one in particular concerned Martin more than the patient herself. Tom flipped through the journal to a page marked with a faded red ribbon. "Read this," he said quietly. The entry was dated December 12, 1983. December 12, 1983, 1:30 a.m. Found a new orderly standing outside the morgue, staring at the wall. When I approached, he didn't respond to his name. His eyes were open but unfocused. I touched his shoulder, and he collapsed as if his strings had been cut. Called for medical help. By the time Dr. Winters arrived, the orderly was conscious but had no memory of how he got to the morgue. Said the last thing he remembered was taking his break in the cafeteria on the first floor. 1:45 a.m. While cleaning the hallway outside the morgue, noticed an unusual shadow on the wall, too tall and thin to belong to any staff member, with what appeared to be elongated fingers. When I turned to see what was casting it, there was nothing there, but the shadow remained for several seconds before fading. 3:10 a.m. The emergency lights activated on the fourth floor at the usual time, 3:08, but I also noticed something new, a cold wind blowing from the morgue toward the elevator shafts as if being pulled upward. Followed it to the fourth floor and found the door to room 408 vibrating slightly in its frame. 3:15 a.m. Witnessed something I've never seen before. A dark figure emerged from the morgue cooler and moved toward the elevator, not walking but gliding, its feet not touching the ground. It wore what looked like an old-fashioned doctor's coat, but its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, head too small. It carried something in its arms that I couldn't clearly see, but it appeared to be dripping. I remained hidden behind my protection symbols, and it passed without noticing me. 3:30 a.m. Checked the morgue inventory. Nothing missing, all bodies accounted for. But the temperature in the cooler was unusually warm, and there was a strange symbol drawn on the inside of one of the doors, not with paint or marker, but as if etched into the metal with acid. Additional note: this is the third time I've seen this entity in the past month, always emerging from the morgue around 3:10 a.m., shortly after activity begins in room 408. I believe they are connected somehow. I'm calling it the Doctor, until I learn more. I looked up from the journal, a chill running down my spine. The Doctor? Is that what that note was warning me about? Tom nodded grimly. Martin became convinced that the patient wasn't acting alone. She was connected to this other entity, the Doctor, who seemed to be collecting something from the morgue and bringing it to her. Collecting what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Martin never figured that out completely, Tom said, but his later entries suggest a theory. He turned to one of the final pages in the journal. February 22, 1992, personal theory. Do not share widely after nearly 30 years of observation. I believe I understand the relationship between the patient and the doctor. They aren't the same type of entity at all. The patient is bound to room 408. She cannot leave it during the active hours, can only manifest fully within that space. But the doctor moves freely throughout the hospital, acting as her collector. What does he collect? Essence, life force, soul, whatever you want to call it. From those who have recently died in the hospital. In the moments after death, before the body is completely empty of whatever animates us, the doctor harvests what remains and brings it to the patient. What? To strengthen the barrier between her realm and ours. Each feeding reinforces the walls of her prison, keeping her contained, mostly. But the barrier weakens over time, requiring regular reinforcement. The real danger isn't the patient breaking free, it's what happens when the doctor can't find enough essence to maintain the barrier. When that happens, he begins to seek out the living. I felt my blood run cold. So this doctor entity harvests the recently deceased to feed the patient? To keep her contained? That's what Martin believed, Tom confirmed. And there's some evidence to support it. Hospital records show that periods of increased activity around room 408, more sightings, cold spots, equipment failures, often correspond with periods when the mortality rate in the hospital was unusually low. So when the doctor can't collect enough from the dead, he seeks out the living, Tom finished. Specifically, those who are vulnerable, alone in the hospital at night, already weakened by illness or injury, or, he met my eyes meaningfully, those who have been marked by the patient. The implication hit me like a physical blow. The note on my car. Someone was warning me that now that I've seen the patient, the doctor might come for me instead. Tom nodded. Being marked makes you visible to both entities. The patient can't leave room 408, but the doctor, he moves throughout the hospital. And unlike the patient, who can only fully manifest during the active hours, the doctor's movements aren't as restricted by time. Who left me the warning? I asked. Is there someone else who knows about all this? There are always a few people in the hospital who know or suspect something, Tom said. Night nurses who've worked here for decades. Custodians who've seen things they can't explain. Some talk to each other, share stories, warnings. Martin had a small network of trusted confidants by the time he retired. He pulled one more item from the box, a small leather pouch on a cord. Martin made several of these protective amulets over the years, gave them to night staff he thought were at risk. This is the last one. He handed me the pouch. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and something inside shifted when I moved it. Don't open it, Tom warned. The components need to stay sealed. Wear it under your clothes, especially during night shifts. It might not be as effective as Martin's carved symbols, but it's better than nothing. I slipped the cord over my head, tucking the pouch under my uniform shirt. So what do I do now? Just keep working here and hope the doctor doesn't find me? Tom closed Martin's journal and returned it to the box. That depends on you. Some people quit after learning the truth. Others stay but request daytime shifts. A few, like me, choose to remain on nights, to watch, to document, to warn others when necessary. Like you warned me? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Tom had the grace to look ashamed. I should have been more direct. But we found that too much information too soon can make things worse. Some people become obsessed, start seeking out the entities, trying to see or communicate with them. That never ends well. I thought about what I'd do, what choice I'd make. But before I could respond, my radio crackled to life. Security, this is Sarah at the nurse's station. We have a situation on the second floor, East Wing. Patient reported seeing someone in their room who wasn't there when the nurse arrived. Can you check it out? Tom and I exchanged a look. The second floor East Wing was directly below the fourth floor, directly below room 408. Go, Tom said, standing. But be careful. And Alex? He hesitated. If you see anything unusual, anything at all, don't approach it. Radio me immediately. I made my way to the second floor, the leather pouch a reassuring weight against my chest. The East Wing was quiet when I arrived, the overhead lights dimmed for patient comfort during sleeping hours. A nurse, not Sarah but a younger woman named Melissa I recognized from previous shifts, was standing outside one of the rooms looking concerned. Thanks for coming, she said when she saw me. It's Mrs. Chin in room 212. She woke up about 20 minutes ago, very agitated, claiming there was a tall man standing in the corner of her room watching her. By the time I got here there was no one. I've checked nearby rooms, hallways, nothing. She's quite insistent though. Mind if I talk to her? I asked. Melissa hesitated. She's calmer now but still shaken. Maybe it was just a dream, but... Her voice trailed off. But... I prompted. The room was freezing when I came in. Like someone had left a window open in winter, except the windows don't open on this floor. And there was this smell. Like chemicals but also something else. Something wrong. My skin prickled with goosebumps, but I kept my expression neutral. I'll just ask her a few questions. Standard procedure. Mrs. Chun was an elderly Asian woman, sitting up in her hospital bed with an extra blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the room now feeling comfortably warm. Her eyes were alert and sharply intelligent as she watched me enter. "Another one to tell me I was dreaming?" she asked, her voice clear and strong despite her age. "No, ma'am," I replied. "I'd like to hear exactly what you saw in your own words." She studied me for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. "He was standing right there," she pointed to the corner of the room nearest the bathroom. "Tall and thin, too thin to be natural. Wearing an old-fashioned doctor's coat, but it was stained. Dark patches all over it." My heart began to hammer in my chest. "Could you see his face?" Mrs. Chin shook her head. "It was in shadow. But I could feel him watching me. His head was small like a child's, but his arms were long, reaching almost to the floor. And his hands?" She shuddered. "His fingers were too long like spider legs." She was describing the doctor, exactly as Martin had documented in his journal. "What was he doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just standing there at first, watching. Then he moved toward me. Not walking but gliding. Like his feet weren't touching the ground." Mrs. Chen's hands twisted in the blanket. "When he got to the end of my bed, he reached out one of those terrible hands toward my face. I screamed and he dissolved. Turned into shadow and seeped into the floor." "Did he say anything? Make any sound?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Not words. But there was a sound, like the wind through dead leaves. A dry rustling. And cold. It was so cold when he was near I could see my breath." I nodded, making notes on my tablet, though I knew I wouldn't be including this in any official report. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Chin. I'll make sure we have someone check on you regularly tonight." As I turned to leave, she caught my wrist with surprising strength. "You believe me," she said, not a question but a statement. "You've seen something too." I hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Get some rest, Mrs. Chin. And if you see him again, press your call button immediately." Back in the hallway, I radioed Tom. "Second floor is clear now, but we had a possible sighting matching the description in Martin's journal. Patient is unharmed but shaken." "Copy that," Tom replied, his voice tight. "Return to regular rounds. I'll increase patrols on the second floor tonight." For the next hour, I conducted my normal security checks, avoiding the fourth floor but keeping a close eye on the second floor east wing. Nothing unusual occurred, and I began to hope that the doctor's appearance to Mrs. Chen had been an isolated incident. That hope died at 2:55 a.m., when I was making my way through the first-floor outpatient clinic. The lights in the corridor ahead began to flicker, and the temperature dropped so rapidly that my next breath came out as a visible cloud. My radio emitted a burst of static, then went silent. No static, no background hum, nothing. I froze, remembering Tom's warning not to approach anything unusual. But the entity wasn't ahead of me, it was behind me. I could feel it, a presence at my back, radiating cold and wrong. Slowly I turned. The thing Martin had called the doctor stood at the far end of the corridor. In the flickering light, its proportions seemed to shift and change. Sometimes impossibly tall and thin, other times hunched and bulging in strange places. The only constants were the stained white coat and those unnaturally long fingers, which trailed almost to the floor. I clutched the leather pouch through my shirt, backing away slowly. The doctor remained motionless for several seconds, then began to move toward me, not walking but gliding, exactly as Mrs. Chen and Martin had described, as if suspended an inch above the floor. My training abandoned me. I turned and ran, sprinting through the darkened clinic toward the main hallway where there would be other staff, lights, safety in numbers. Behind me, I heard that dry rustling sound Mrs. Chen had mentioned, like dead leaves in a cold wind. I burst through the double doors into the main corridor, nearly colliding with a startled nurse pushing a medication cart. "Call security." I gasped, then remembered I was security. "I need to find Tom Henderson." The nurse looked alarmed. "Are you okay? You're as white as a sheet." I glanced back through the windows in the double doors. The corridor beyond was now normally lit, with no sign of the doctor. "I'm fine," I managed, fighting to control my breathing. "Just thought I saw someone who shouldn't be in the clinic after hours." Before she could question me further, my radio crackled back to life. "Alex, this is Tom. Meet me on the third floor, West Wing Station. Now." The urgency in his voice propelled me toward the nearest stairwell. I wasn't going to risk the elevator after what I'd just seen. Tom was waiting by the nurse's station, his face grim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The doctor isn't just active tonight, he's hunting. 2 more sightings in the last 10 minutes, one on this floor and one in the basement near the morgue." "I just saw him too," I admitted. "First floor outpatient clinic." He approached me. Tom's expression darkened. "That's not good. 3 sightings in different locations means he's moving throughout the building, searching. And it's almost 3:08. As if on cue, every light in the corridor dimmed momentarily, then returned to normal brightness. A distant sound, like metal striking metal, echoed from somewhere above us. "The 4th floor," Tom muttered. "The barrier's thinning. Come on." "Wait, we're going up there? Now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Isn't that exactly what we should be avoiding? Normally, yes. But Martin's journal describes a way to strengthen the barrier without the doctor's collections. A ritual of sorts using the protective symbols. If we can reinforce the barrier ourselves, it might buy us time, make the doctor retreat. The idea seemed absurd, conducting some occult ritual in a hospital corridor, but after what I'd witnessed, I wasn't in a position to dismiss anything. "What do we need to do?" I asked. Tom pulled a small leather case from his pocket. Inside were pieces of chalk in various colors, a small vial of what looked like salt, and a folded paper with symbols drawn on it, similar to those carved into Martin's mop handle. "We need to draw these at the 4 corners surrounding room 408, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. The symbols create a binding zone, containing what's inside and strengthening the existing barrier." I remembered what he'd said earlier about the hospital trying to demolish room 408, only for the foreman to disappear. "Will this be dangerous?" "Less dangerous than doing nothing," Tom said grimly, checking his watch. "It's 3:05. We need to hurry." We took the stairs to the 4th floor, emerging into a corridor that was noticeably colder than the rest of the hospital. The overhead lights buzzed and flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Tom led the way toward the east wing, moving quickly but cautiously. As we approached the corridor containing room 408, the air grew even colder, and I could see frost forming on the metal door frames we passed. "You take the southern corners," Tom instructed, handing me the chalk and the paper with the symbols. "I'll take the northern ones. Draw them exactly as shown, and whatever you do, don't stop once you've started a symbol. Even an incomplete protection sign is better than none." I nodded, taking the chalk with numb fingers. "What if we see something? Don't look directly at it. Don't engage. Focus on the symbols." Tom tapped the leather pouch under my shirt. "That should provide some protection, but it's not foolproof." We split up, Tom heading for the northwest corner while I made for the southeast. The corridor felt unnaturally long, the distance to my destination seeming to stretch with each step. The temperature continued to drop until each breath formed a cloud in front of my face. When I reached the southeast corner, I knelt down and began copying the first symbol from the paper onto the floor, using the red chalk as Tom had instructed. The design was complex, interlocking circles and lines forming a pattern that seemed to shift before my eyes. As I drew, I became aware of a subtle vibration in the floor, a low hum that I felt more than heard. I was halfway through the symbol when the overhead lights went out completely, plunging the corridor into darkness. A second later, the emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. My hand trembled, but I forced myself to continue drawing, focusing entirely on completing the pattern. As I placed the final line, the symbol seemed to pulse once, like a heartbeat, before settling into a dull glow that was visible even under the red emergency lighting. 1 down, 1 to go. I stood and hurried toward the southwest corner, keeping my eyes fixed on my destination, avoiding looking at room 408 as I passed. But as I drew near the door, I heard it, a woman's voice barely above a whisper. "Help me. Please help me." Every instinct screamed at me not to look, to keep moving, but the voice was so plaintive, so desperate, that I couldn't help glancing toward the sound. The door to room 408 was open a crack, darkness spilling out into the hallway like liquid shadow. Through the narrow opening, I could see nothing but blackness, a darkness deeper than the absence of light, a void. "They've trapped me here," the voice whispered. "For so long. Help me get out." I tore my gaze away, forcing myself to continue toward the southwest corner. Behind me, the voice changed, hardening. "You're already marked. You belong to me now." I began drawing the second symbol with shaking hands, the chalk skittering across the floor as I struggled to recreate the pattern. Halfway through, I heard a new sound from down the hall, the dry rustling that accompanied the doctor. "Don't look up. Don't stop drawing." I repeated this mantra to myself as I worked, my fingers cramping with the effort of maintaining precision despite my fear. The rustling grew louder, closer. Just as I completed the final line of the symbol, something cold brushed the back of my neck, a touch so frigid it burned. I cried out, the chalk falling from my nerveless fingers, and instinctively turned to face whatever was behind me. The doctor stood there no more than 3 feet away. In the red emergency lighting, I could finally see what Mrs. Chen had not, its face, or rather the absence of one. Where features should have been was only smooth, pale skin stretched tight over a skull-like structure, with 2 deep hollows where eyes should be. It had no mouth, no nose, yet somehow I could feel it observing me, evaluating. It raised one elongated hand, fingers unfurling like the legs of a spider, reaching for my face. I scrambled backward, my shoulder blades hitting the wall, nowhere left to retreat. "Hey!" Tom's voice rang out from the other end of the corridor. "Over here." The doctor's head snapped toward the sound with unnatural speed, its neck extending further than should have been physically possible. It made that rustling sound again, louder now, almost like speech. Tom stood at the north end of the corridor, both his symbols completed and glowing faintly. He held Martin's mop handle in his hands like a staff, the carved protection symbols clearly visible even in the dim red light. "The barrier is sealed," he called out. "4 corners bound. You have no purpose here tonight." The doctor's form seemed to waver, becoming less solid, more like smoke held in the rough shape of a human. It moved away from me, gliding toward Tom, that rustling noise rising in volume and pitch until it became almost a scream, a sound like sandpaper on bone. Tom stood his ground, holding the mop handle before him like a ward. The doctor stopped several feet away, its form continuing to lose definition, wisps of shadow peeling away from its edges. A sudden violent gust of cold wind tore through the corridor, extinguishing the emergency lights and plunging us into total darkness. I heard Tom shout something I couldn't make out, then a heavy thud like a body hitting the floor. "Tom?" I called out, fumbling for my flashlight. Before I could find it, the regular lights flickered back on, revealing an empty corridor. The doctor was gone. And so was Tom. Where he had been standing was only the mop handle, lying on the floor as if dropped. I ran to it, calling his name, searching the nearby rooms, but found no trace of him. As I stood there, trying to process what had happened, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door to room 408, which had been open a crack earlier, was now firmly closed. And taped to it was a new note in that same jagged handwriting. "A trade has been made. The barrier holds. For now." Part 3: The Night Runner. Tom's disappearance was explained away as abandonment of duty. Hospital administration claimed he had simply walked out mid-shift, citing personal problems they had been aware of for some time. His car was found in the parking lot, keys still in the ignition, which they suggested meant he'd left with someone else. I knew better, of course. Tom hadn't abandoned anything. He'd been taken, sacrificed to strengthen the barrier containing whatever lived in room 408. The doctor had claimed him when our improvised ritual had threatened its purpose. In the days that followed, I considered quitting countless times. I drafted resignation letters, researched other security positions, even went to a few interviews. But something kept pulling me back to Lakeside Memorial, an obligation I couldn't quite name. Tom had tried to protect me, to warn me, and now he was gone. I couldn't just walk away. 2 weeks after Tom's disappearance, Sarah approached me in the cafeteria during my break. "You're still here," she observed, sliding into the seat across from me. It wasn't a question. "So are you," I replied. She gave me a tired smile. 23 years and counting. Some of us can't leave, Alex. Not when we know what's happening here. Have you seen it? The patient?" Sarah shook her head. "Not directly. I felt her presence, heard her voice once or twice. But I've been careful to stay away during the active hours." She hesitated, then reached across the table to touch my arm. "Tom told me he gave you Martin's amulet. You're wearing it?" I nodded, patting the leather pouch under my shirt. I hadn't taken it off since that night, even when showering. "Good. Keep it close. Especially tonight." "What's tonight?" Sarah glanced around to ensure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "It's March 8th, she whispered. "The anniversary of Margaret Holloway's disappearance. The day the barrier first formed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Is that significant?" "According to Martin's journal, yes. The barrier is weakest on the anniversary, requiring more maintenance from the doctor. It's his most active night of the year. So I should call in sick? Take the night off? Sarah's expression hardened. No. We need you here. With Tom gone, you're the only security staff who knows the truth, who's prepared. I've already called in every experienced night nurse I trust, but we need someone who can move freely throughout the hospital, someone who can warn others if necessary. I wanted to refuse, to tell her there was no way I was setting foot in Lakeside Memorial tonight of all nights. But the determination in her eyes stopped me. Sarah had been dealing with this for over 2 decades. Who was I to walk away after just a few weeks? What's the plan? I asked finally. Relief flickered across her face. Meet me in the basement archive room at midnight. I'll explain everything then. The first part of my shift passed with agonizing slowness. Every shadow seemed to move in my peripheral vision. Every cold draft made me freeze in place. By 11:45 p.m., my nerves were stretched to breaking point as I made my way down to the basement. Sarah was waiting in the archive room, but she wasn't alone. 3 other staff members sat around the table. Melissa, the young nurse I'd met the night of Mrs. Chen's sighting. James, an older orderly with graying hair and lined face, and a woman I didn't recognize, dressed in hospital maintenance coveralls. This is Alex, Sarah introduced me. He's seen both entities and survived. Alex, you've met Melissa. This is James, who's been working nights here for 15 years, and Rosa from maintenance, who's been here even longer than I have. Rosa nodded at me, her dark eyes evaluating. So you're Tom's replacement, she said, her accent revealing hints of Caribbean origins. He spoke of you. Said you had potential. Potential for what? I asked, taking the empty seat at the table. To become a watcher, James explained. That's what we call ourselves. We keep vigil during the night hours, document the entity's activities, protect the patients and staff as best we can. Martin Green started the tradition, Sarah added. He trained Tom, who trained us. Now with Tom gone. The implication hung in the air between us. I was expected to step into Tom's role, to become part of this strange group of night shift workers united by their knowledge of Lakeside Memorial's dark secret. And tonight? I prompted, not ready to commit to anything long-term. Sarah opened a familiar cardboard box, the same one Tom had shown me, containing Martin's journal and artifacts. Tonight we need to monitor the entity's movements more closely than usual. March 8th is when the barrier is thinnest, when the patient is most likely to break through into our reality. Has that ever happened? I asked. Has she ever gotten out of room 408? The 4 watchers exchanged glances before Rosa spoke. Once. In 1985. She manifested in the hallway outside her room, made it as far as the elevator before the doctor intercepted her. What happened? 3 patients died that night, James said grimly. Seemingly of natural causes, heart attacks, strokes. But all at the exact same time, 3:08 a.m. Their rooms were on the path between room 408 and the elevator. The doctor took what he needed to strengthen the barrier, Sarah explained. To force her back into containment. A heavy silence fell over the room as I processed this information. So what's our role tonight? What can we possibly do against these entities? We observe. We document. We warn others to stay clear, Sarah said. And if necessary we perform the binding ritual like Tom tried to do. That didn't work out so well for him, I pointed out. It didn't work because there were only 2 of you, Rosa countered. Tonight there are 5. Enough to cover all exits from the 4th floor, not just the area around room 408. We've each been assigned a position, Melissa explained, spreading a hospital floor plan on the table. Sarah and I will monitor the west stairwell and elevator. James takes the east stairwell. Rosa covers the service elevator. You'll be mobile, patrolling the 3rd floor directly below room 408, watching for any signs of the doctor's activity. It was a solid plan, I had to admit. With 5 of us strategically positioned, we could observe the entity's movements without directly confronting them. We stay in constant radio contact, Sarah instructed, handing me a different radio than my standard security one. These are on a private frequency. Hospital administration doesn't monitor it. What exactly are we watching for? I asked. How will we know if the barrier is breaking? Temperature drops. Lights flickering. Electronic malfunctions, James listed off. The usual signs but more intense. And if you see the doctor moving between floors, especially carrying anything, that's a bad sign. It means he's actively collecting. And if the worst happens? If she gets out? The four watchers exchanged another look before Rosa reached into her pocket and withdrew a small cloth bag. She emptied its contents onto the table. 5 identical pendants, each a small iron disc etched with symbols similar to those on Martin's mop handle, strung on leather cords. Iron and salt, she explained. The two things that repel both entities. Not enough to destroy them but enough to force them back temporarily. If the patient manifests outside room 408, hold this between you and her. Don't look directly at her face and back away toward the nearest exit. And pray, James added quietly. We each took a pendant, adding it to whatever protective items we already carried. I now wore both Martin's leather pouch and Rosa's iron disc. Double protection that nevertheless felt woefully inadequate against what we might face. Sarah checked her watch. It's 11:58. We should get into position. The activity usually starts building around 2 a.m., peaks at 3:08. We left the archive room together, separating at the basement elevator to head to our assigned positions. As I made my way to the 3rd floor, I found myself wondering how I'd gotten here, from skeptical new night guard to member of a secret group of hospital workers defending against supernatural entities. If someone had described this scenario to me a month ago, I'd have laughed in their face. The 3rd floor was quiet when I arrived, the patient rooms dark save for the soft glow of monitoring equipment. I began my patrol of the East Wing, directly below room 408, watching for any signs of unusual activity. For the first hour nothing happened. I paced the hallways, checking doors, nodding to the occasional night nurse, all while keeping an eye on the temperature and lighting. The radio remained silent except for regular check-ins from the other watchers, each reporting normal conditions. At 1:15 a.m. I felt the first hint that something was changing. The air in the East Wing corridor seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe, as if the oxygen content had subtly decreased. The sensation lasted only a few seconds before normalizing, but it left me with a lingering unease. Anyone else feel that? I whispered into the radio. Yes, came Rosa's immediate response. 4th floor service area just had a pressure drop. Like being in an airplane when your ears pop. Nothing in the west stairwell, Sarah reported. East stairwell clear, added James. We continued our vigil, the minutes crawling by. At 2 a.m. sharp, all the lights on the 3rd floor flickered simultaneously, dimming for 3 seconds before returning to normal brightness. The temperature began a gradual but noticeable decline. It's starting, Sarah's voice came through the radio. Everyone stay alert. By 2:30 a.m., frost was forming on the windows of the 3rd floor East Wing, spreading in crystalline patterns despite the building's heating system running at full capacity. My breath clouded in front of me as I patrolled, and I found myself grateful for the extra layers I'd worn tonight. At 2:45 a.m. Melissa's frightened voice broke the silence. Movement on the 4th floor west corridor. Something's crawling along the ceiling. Moving toward room 408. Can you describe it? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the alarming report. It's like a shadow but three-dimensional. No clear shape, just darkness flowing across the ceiling like liquid. Don't approach it, Rosa warned. Just observe. I turned my attention to the ceiling above me, wondering if I might see something similar coming through from the 4th floor. The drop ceiling tiles looked normal, but as I watched, I noticed a subtle darkening in one corner, as if a stain were spreading. I've got something similar on the 3rd floor, I reported. Darkness spreading across the ceiling. Over the next 15 minutes, the stain grew, covering nearly a quarter of the ceiling in the East Wing corridor. It didn't drip or fall, it simply spread like ink through paper, stopping at the boundaries of the East Wing. At 3 a.m. the real activity began. The doctor is on the move, James's tense voice came through the radio. East stairwell moving down from the 4th floor. My heart began to race. Coming to the 3rd floor? Negative. Continuing down, headed for the basement. Rosa, he's coming your way. Copy that, Rosa replied calmly. I see him. He's heading for the morgue. This matched the pattern in Martin's journal, the doctor collecting from the recently deceased to strengthen the barrier. I allowed myself a small measure of relief. If he was following his usual routine, perhaps tonight wouldn't be as dangerous as feared. That relief was short-lived. At 3:05 a.m., every light in the hospital flickered violently, then dimmed to half their normal brightness. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that the condensation in the air crystallized, creating a brief, localized snowfall in the corridor where I stood. It's happening, Sarah's voice was tight with fear. The barrier is weakening. Everyone, confirm positions. One by one the watchers called in their locations. I was about to report when a sound stopped me, footsteps coming from the patient rooms to my right. Slow, dragging footsteps as if someone were walking with great difficulty. I turned to see a patient shuffling down the hallway in a hospital gown, an elderly man I recognized from my rounds, who should have been bedridden with late-stage cancer. His eyes were open but vacant, staring straight ahead as he moved with jerky, puppet-like motions toward the elevator. "We have a patient sleepwalking on the 3rd floor," I reported, moving to intercept him. "I'll guide him back to bed." "Wait," Rosa's voice was sharp. "Check his eyes. Are the pupils dilated?" I stepped in front of the man, blocking his path. "Sir? You need to return to your room." I shined my flashlight briefly across his face. His pupils were completely dilated, black, consuming the iris entirely. But more disturbing was his expression, or rather, the lack of one. His face was slack, empty, as if the person inside had vacated the premises. "Pupils fully dilated," I confirmed. "He's not responding." "Don't touch him," Rosa warned. "That's not sleepwalking. He's being called." A chill ran down my spine. Called? By what? By her. The patient sometimes calls to the vulnerable when the barrier weakens, the elderly, the very ill. They're easier to influence. As if to confirm Rosa's assessment, 2 more doors opened further down the hall, and more patients emerged, an older woman with an 4-stand she dragged behind her, and a middle-aged man in a cast. Both had the same vacant expression. Both moved with the same unnatural gait toward the elevator. 3 patients now, I reported, my voice rising with urgency. All heading for the elevator. "What do I do?" "Block the elevator," Sarah instructed. "Don't let them reach the 4th floor. But be careful, they're not in control of themselves." I positioned myself in front of the elevator doors, arms spread wide. "Please return to your rooms," I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my fear. "This area is restricted." The patients continued forward, unseen, unhearing. The elderly man in the lead reached out as if to push me aside, his cold fingers brushing my uniform. The moment he touched me, I felt it, a surge of wrongness like an electrical current running through my body. Behind those empty eyes, something else was looking out, something ancient and hungry. I stumbled backward, breaking contact. The leather pouch under my shirt burned suddenly hot against my skin, and the old man recoiled as if burned, a hiss escaping his lips that sounded nothing like a human vocalization. "They're trying to reach the elevator." I shouted into the radio. "I need backup." "On my way," James responded immediately. "Hold position." The 3 patients had stopped advancing, standing in a loose semicircle a few feet away, their heads tilted at identical angles as if listening to a distant voice. Then, with synchronized movements, they turned toward the stairwell instead. "They're heading for the east stairwell," I reported, following at a safe distance. "James, they're coming your way." "I see them," he confirmed. 4th floor door is secured. They won't get through." But as the patients reached the stairwell door, something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to go up to the 4th floor, they began descending, moving with surprising speed for their conditions. "They're going down, not up," I said, confused. "Heading to the 2nd floor." "The morgue?" Rosa's voice was thick with dread. "They're heading to the morgue. Where the doctor is." I raced down the stairs after them, keeping them in sight while maintaining distance. By the time I reached the 2nd floor, Sarah and Melissa had joined me, both breathing hard from running. "What's happening?" Sarah demanded. "Why would she send them to the morgue?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to stop them before they reach the basement." The 3 of us hurried after the patients, who were moving with single-minded purpose toward the service elevator, the most direct route to the basement morgue. When we caught up, Melissa tried a different approach, stepping forward with a nurse's authority. "Mr. Jensen, Mrs. Patel, Mr. Donahue," she addressed each patient by name. "You need medical attention. Please let us help you back to your rooms." For a moment it seemed to work. The patients paused, confusion flickering across their vacant expressions. Mrs. Patel's hand trembled as she reached for Melissa, a tear tracking down her cheek. Then the service elevator arrived with a soft ping, and the doors slid open. Inside stood the doctor. In the harsh fluorescent light of the elevator, I could see him clearly for the first time. The stained white coat hung from a frame too tall and thin to be human, the sleeves ending in those grotesquely elongated fingers. His head was small and smooth, featureless except for 2 deep hollows where eyes should be. And in his arms, he carried something, a swirling, shimmering substance that looked like liquid smoke, glowing with a faint bluish light. The 3 patients lurched forward as one, drawn toward the elevator. Melissa grabbed Mrs. Patel's arm, trying to hold her back, but the elderly woman showed impossible strength, throwing the nurse aside with enough force to send her sprawling. "Melissa!" Sarah cried, rushing to help her colleague. I stood frozen, watching as the patients entered the elevator, arranging themselves around the doctor like satellites orbiting a dark star. The entity made no move to touch them, but as the doors began to close, I saw those long fingers unfurl, reaching toward the nearest patient's face. "No!" I lunged forward, driven by instinct rather than any coherent plan. My hand caught the elevator door just before it closed completely, forcing it to reopen. The doctor's hollow eye sockets turned toward me, and though he had no visible eyes, I felt his gaze like ice water down my spine. The rustling sound filled the elevator, rising in pitch until it became almost a scream. The patients dropped to their knees, clutching their heads in apparent agony. The swirling substance in the doctor's arms pulsed brighter, tendrils of blue-white light reaching out toward the kneeling patients. Without thinking, I grabbed the iron pendant Rosa had given me, thrusting it into the elevator. "Let them go!" I shouted, the words torn from some primal place of defiance. The doctor recoiled, the rustling cry sharpening to a sound like tearing metal. The substance in his arms roiled violently, and for a split second, I thought I saw faces in it, dozens of human faces, mouths open in silent screams, before they dissolved back into formlessness. Then something happened that none of Martin's journals had prepared me for. The doctor spoke, not in a human voice, but in a sound like stones grinding together, each word distinct yet utterly alien. "The barrier fails. She comes. These few for many." Before I could react, one elongated hand shot out, striking me in the center of the chest. The blow sent me flying backward, landing hard on the corridor floor. The elevator doors closed with finality, and I heard the mechanism engage as it began descending to the basement. Sarah helped me to my feet while Melissa called frantically into her radio. "Rosa, they're coming to you. The doctor has 3 patients in the service elevator, heading to the morgue." Rosa's reply was lost in a burst of static as every light in the hospital suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, bathing the corridor in dim red illumination. "It's 3:08, Sarah whispered, checking her watch. "The barrier is at its weakest." As if in response to her words, a low rumbling vibration began to shake the building, like a distant earthquake. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and somewhere above us, I heard the sound of breaking glass. "4th floor." James's panicked voice came through the static. "The walls around room 408 are changing, bulging outward like something's pushing from inside." I can hear her, screaming, laughing. "You need to see this." "No." Sarah grabbed the radio. "James, get out of there. Now." But James either couldn't hear her or chose to ignore the warning. "The door is opening," he continued, his voice filled with horrified fascination. "Not opening, melting. The metal is liquefying. Something's coming through. Oh God, it's not just her. There are others behind her, dozens of them reaching through from somewhere else." His transmission cut off abruptly. "James?" Sarah called. "James, respond." Nothing but static answered her. "We need to get to the 4th floor," I said, moving toward the stairwell. Sarah caught my arm. "That's suicide. You heard what's happening up there." "James is up there," I reminded her. "And if the patient is breaking free, the entire hospital is in danger." Melissa looked between us, torn. "What about the patients in the elevator? The doctor took them to the morgue. Shouldn't we try to help them?" "Rosa's in the morgue," Sarah said. "She knows what to do. Our priority has to be containing the breach on the 4th floor." I felt the weight of Martin's leather pouch against my chest, now cool again after its brief flare of heat. "The symbols Tom tried to use, the binding ritual. Do you know how to perform it?" Sarah nodded. "Rosa taught all of us. But it would take all 3 of us to have any chance of success, and even then, it's our only option," I said grimly. "We can't let whatever's in that room escape into the hospital." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah nodded. "Melissa, go to the security office. There's a red emergency button under the main desk. It will trigger a general evacuation alarm. Get as many patients and staff out of the building as possible." Melissa looked scared but determined. "What about you two?" "We're going to try to close the breach," Sarah said, her voice steadier than I expected. "If we're not back in 20 minutes..." "We'll be back," I interrupted, not wanting to consider the alternative. Melissa hugged us both quickly, then hurried toward the security office. Sarah and I headed for the stairwell, climbing toward whatever awaited us on the 4th floor. The stairwell grew colder with each floor we ascended, frost forming on the metal railings by the time we reached the fourth-floor landing. The door leading to the east wing corridor vibrated slightly in its frame, and beyond it, I could hear a sound like wind rushing through a narrow space. "Ready?" I asked, gripping the iron pendant in one hand. Sarah withdrew a piece of chalk from her pocket, the same red chalk Tom had used for the binding symbols. "As ready as I'll ever be." Together we pushed through the door into chaos. The corridor outside room 408 had transformed. The walls warped and bulged as if made of fabric rather than plaster and wood, rippling with movement from within. The ceiling had partially collapsed, revealing pipes and electrical wiring that twisted like living things, sparking and hissing. The floor beneath our feet felt wrong, too soft, giving slightly with each step like marsh ground. And at the center of it all was room 408, its door no longer recognizable as such. The metal had indeed melted, flowing down to form a puddle on the floor, leaving an opening that resembled nothing so much as a wound in the fabric of reality. Beyond the opening was not a hospital room but a vast, dark space, punctuated by distant points of cold light. James was nowhere to be seen. "The symbols," Sarah gasped, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "We need to draw them at the corners." We separated, Sarah taking the left side of the corridor while I took the right. The floor continued to shift beneath me as I knelt to draw the first binding symbol, making it difficult to create the precise lines and curves the ritual required. As I worked, I became aware of movement from the opening that had been room 408. Something was emerging, not the patient as I'd seen her before, but a different form. Taller, more fluid, her outline shifting and changing like smoke and wind. Where her face should have been was that same void I'd glimpsed before, but larger now, hungry. Behind her, in the darkness beyond the breach, I could see other shapes moving, pressing forward. Dozens of silhouettes, some human in form, others more abstract, geometries that hurt the eye to focus on. "Hurry!" Sarah called from the other side of the corridor, her chalk scraping frantically against the floor. I forced myself to focus on the symbol, ignoring the cold that was now so intense it burned my fingers, ignoring the whispers that had begun to fill the air, multiple voices speaking over each other in languages I couldn't understand. The patient continued to emerge, more of her form pressing through the breach with each passing second. She was almost fully in our reality now, her presence causing the lights to dim further, the air to crystallize around her. I completed the first symbol and moved quickly to the second corner, nearly losing my balance as the floor undulated beneath me. By the time I knelt to begin the second symbol, the patient had fully emerged from the breach and stood in the corridor, her form towering nearly to the ceiling. She turned toward Sarah first, gliding forward with that same smooth movement I'd seen before. Sarah didn't look up, concentrating on completing her second symbol even as the temperature around her dropped so low that her hair began to frost over. "Sarah," I called in warning. "On your left." She finished the symbol with a flourish and rolled away just as the patient reached for her, those void-like fingers passing through the space Sarah had occupied a second earlier. The completed symbol on the floor pulsed with light, and the patient recoiled from it, a sound like the hissing of 1,000 snakes emanating from where her mouth should have been. I worked faster on my own symbol, aware that I was now the focus of the patient's attention. She glided toward me, trailing cold and darkness, the whispers growing louder in her wake. "Alex," a voice rose above the others, Tom's voice coming from the void of her face. "Alex, don't fight her. She can give you what you want. What you've always wanted." I faltered, my hand freezing mid-stroke. "Tom? She saved me, Alex. Showed me the truth beyond this world. You can see it too. Just look up. Look at her." For a moment, one terrible, vulnerable moment, I almost obeyed, nearly raised my eyes to the patient's void face. But the weight of Martin's pouch against my skin brought me back to reality. Tom was gone. Whatever spoke with his voice was not him. I completed the symbol with a final, decisive stroke, and it flared to life like the others, pulsing with a light that seemed to push back the darkness surrounding the patient. She stopped her advance, hovering at the edge of the symbol's influence. The shapes behind her, still trying to push through the breach, grew more agitated, their movements more frenzied. "4 symbols," Sarah called, moving to stand beside me. The barrier should be strengthening. But something was wrong. The breach wasn't closing. If anything, it seemed to be widening, the darkness beyond it spilling further into the corridor. "It's not working," I said, fighting to keep panic from my voice. "Why isn't it working?" Sarah's face was grim. "The doctor. The ritual depends on both sides maintaining balance. If he's not reinforcing his side, What do we do? Before Sarah could answer, the building shook with sudden violence, throwing us both to the floor. The emergency lights failed completely, plunging the corridor into darkness except for the faint glow of the binding symbols. In that near darkness, I saw the patient move again, not toward us but back toward the breach. She paused at its edge, her form silhouetted against the cold lights from the space beyond. Then she reached into the void of her chest and withdrew something that pulsed with the same blue-white light I'd seen the doctor carrying earlier. What is she doing? I whispered. Feeding the barrier, Sarah replied, her voice tinged with disbelief. From her side. The patient held the glowing substance up, then with a sudden violent motion, thrust it into the edge of the breach. Light exploded outward, so intense I had to shield my eyes. The building shook again, and a high keening sound filled the air, rising in pitch until it was beyond the range of human hearing. When I could see again, the breach was shrinking, the edges of reality knitting back together. The shapes that had been trying to push through were being pulled back, their silhouettes stretching as if caught in a powerful current. And standing in the corridor before us was the doctor, his stained coat now torn and hanging in tatters from his skeletal frame. In his arms were 3 formless masses, what remained of the patients he had taken. The patient and the doctor faced each other across the rapidly closing breach, neither advancing. They seemed to be communicating somehow, the rustling sound from him rising and falling like speech, answered by the whispers surrounding her. What's happening? I asked, not expecting an answer. To my surprise, Sarah responded, her voice filled with wonder. I think they're negotiating. The barrier was failing because it's been too long since it was properly fed. The doctor couldn't collect enough on his own. So the patient was trying to break free, I reasoned, to collect for herself. Sarah nodded slowly. But something changed. Look. The doctor was approaching the breach, still carrying his grim harvest. The patient reached through from her side, those void fingers extending toward what he carried. He surrendered one of the formless masses to her, which she took back through the breach. The remaining 2 he pressed into the edges of the breach itself, just as she had done with the substance from her chest. More light flared, less intense this time but longer lasting. The breach contracted further, now only the size of a normal doorway. The wild distortions in the corridor began to settle, the walls resuming their proper angles, the floor solidifying beneath us. The balance is being restored, Sarah murmured. As we watched, transfixed, the doctor turned toward us. Though he had no eyes, I felt his awareness, ancient, cold, clinical, assessing us. After a long moment, he extended one long finger, pointing directly at me. Watch her, that grinding stone voice intoned. You are chosen. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Chosen for what? But the doctor was already turning away, gliding back toward the breach, which had shrunk to a narrow slit. The patient had disappeared back through to whatever space lay beyond. The doctor paused at the edge of the breach, his featureless head turning once more in my direction. The barrier requires maintenance. When I am gone, another must attend. You are marked. You are chosen. With those cryptic words, he stepped through the slit, his elongated form folding impossibly to fit the narrow opening. As soon as he had passed through, the breach sealed completely, reality snapping back like stretched elastic returning to shape. Where room 408 had been was now just a normal hospital door, closed and unmarked. The only evidence of what had transpired were the 4 glowing symbols on the floor, which were already fading, and the lingering cold that hung in the air. Sarah and I stood in silent shock, trying to process what we had witnessed. After what seemed like an eternity, my radio crackled to life. Sarah? Alex? Are you there? It was Rosa, her voice tight with concern. The activity in the morgue just stopped. The doctor disappeared and 2 of the patients collapsed. They're alive but unconscious. The 3rd. I couldn't save her. What's happening up there? Sarah raised her radio with a shaking hand. The breach is closed. The barrier has been restored. We're okay, but there's no sign of James. And the hospital? Rosa asked. I looked around at the now normal corridor, the only evidence of our ordeal, the frost slowly melting from the surfaces. Back to normal. As normal as it ever gets, anyway. The evacuation alarm that Melissa had triggered wailed in the distance, and I could hear the chaos of patients and staff being led from the building. There would be questions, investigations, but somehow I knew that any evidence of what had really happened would be gone by morning. The hospital administration would blame the alarm on a system malfunction, the missing James on another case of abandonment. And life at Lakeside Memorial would continue, the night staff keeping their secrets, the day staff never knowing what walked the corridors after dark. As dawn approached and emergency services arrived to manage the evacuation, Sarah pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, away from the confusion. What did it mean? I asked her. When the doctor said I was chosen? That I would need to attend the barrier, when he was gone? Sarah's expression was troubled. I don't know exactly. In all the years Martin documented, in all the records we've kept as watchers, there's never been any indication that the doctor might leave. So what happens now? Now we watch. We document. We protect those we can. She squeezed my arm gently. And you decide whether you want to stay or go. No one would blame you if you walked away, Alex. What you've seen, what you've experienced, it's more than most could handle. I thought about it, really thought about it. About returning to a normal life, working normal security shifts, never again having to worry about entities from beyond reality or barriers that needed feeding. I thought about how easy it would be to leave Lakeside Memorial behind. But then I remembered Tom's face as he confronted the doctor, Martin's meticulous journals documenting decades of vigilance, the patients who had no idea what walked the halls at night. I remembered the doctor's words, "You are marked. You are chosen." "I'm staying," I said finally. Whatever being chosen means, I'd rather face it prepared than pretend none of this happened. Sarah nodded, not surprised. "Then welcome to the Watchers, Alex. God help us all." In the months since that night, life at Lakeside Memorial has settled into a strange new normal. The hospital administration explained away the evacuation as a false alarm triggered by an electrical fault. James's disappearance was attributed to personal problems, just as Tom's had been. The patients who had been taken to the morgue and survived remembered nothing of their ordeal. I continued my night shifts, now with a deeper purpose than simply making my rounds and checking doors. I became a true watcher, documenting strange occurrences, learning the hospital's rhythms, understanding when to investigate and when to stay away. Room 408 remained closed, the door unmarked. No renovation crews were assigned to the East Wing. When I checked the hospital's blueprints in the archive, I found that the room was no longer included. The floor plan showed a solid wall where the door should be. The doctor hasn't reappeared since that night. Neither has the patient made any attempt to breach the barrier again. But sometimes, during the quiet hours between 2 and 4 a.m., I feel a presence moving through the hospital. Something different from either entity we faced. Something watching me as I watch the hospital. And occasionally, I find small objects left in my path during my rounds. A scalpel placed precisely in the center of a corridor, a vial of unidentified liquid on the seat of my chair in the security office, a piece of chalk with unfamiliar symbols drawn on it. Messages, perhaps. Or Tess. I wear Martin's amulet and Rose's iron pendant at all times now. I've begun learning the protection symbols, practicing them until I can draw them perfectly from memory. The other watchers have taught me what they know, shared their experiences, prepared me as best they can. But for what, none of us is certain. All I know is that something is coming. The barrier holds for now, but nothing lasts forever. And when it fails again, when whatever lies beyond room 408 reaches out once more, I'll be there. Watching. Waiting. Ready. Because that's what night shift is really about at Lakeside Memorial. Not just guarding the living from mundane threats, but standing between two worlds, maintaining a boundary most people never know exists. So if you find yourself working nights in a hospital, pay attention to the cold spots, the flickering lights, the strange sounds that echo down empty corridors. Notice which rooms the staff avoid without explanation, which areas feel wrong even when you can't say why. And if you ever feel eyes on you in the darkness, if you ever glimpse movement where nothing should be moving, don't look directly at it. Don't engage. Just remember, you're not alone in the night. We're out there too. The Watchers. Keeping vigil so others can sleep peacefully, blissfully unaware of what walks beside them in the dark. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have run when you first saw the patient's void-like face? Or would you have stayed, becoming a watcher like me? Have you ever experienced something you can't explain during a night shift? Something that made you question what you thought you knew about reality? If you enjoyed this true night shift horror story, please subscribe to The Creepy Shadow for more tales from the darkness. Like this video to help others find it, and share it with anyone who appreciates a glimpse into the spaces between worlds. And leave a comment sharing your own experiences. Because sometimes talking about the darkness is the only way to keep it at bay. Until next time, stay vigilant. The night has eyes, and they're watching.